Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. And today, we want to deepen the discussion that I elaborated on last week about the genocide going on in Gaza and the connections between what we are experiencing now, what we are witnessing now, has with the rise of the Nazis just about 100 years ago in Germany during the late 1920s and 1930s and 40s. I made a rather provocative statement that drew a lot of comment and emails, and I want to begin with that because, as you all know from my previous sessions of Humanity Rising, I consider the situation in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, to be a crime of crimes, in part because the people who endured the worst genocide in history are now transacting the same intensity of genocide within the same generation on another people, in this case, the Palestinians. And I made the comment that while Hitler lost the battle of World War II, he won the war because the toxicity and the poison of Nazism entered into the stream of Zionism at the moment of the creation of Israel in 1948, only 3 years after the ending of the Second World War, and has festered in the Israeli politic that has led to what we're witnessing today in terms of the genocide against the Palestinians. That's a strong statement to make. I also said that the same toxicity that entered Zionism entered into the United States because so many of the Nazis came to the United States directly after the war in Operation Paperclip and other mechanisms of entry. We'll get to that in a moment. What I want to do now as we open is just to refine what we mean by genocide and the striking parallelisms between the Nazi genocide against the Jews and the Israeli genocide against the Palestinians. According to the Geneva Convention on Genocide, which was written and agreed to shortly after the Second World War, genocide is comprised of two primary aspects. It is the actions designed to eliminate a group as such. It is accompanied, number two, with an intention, a stated public intention to do so. In other words, genocide has to be aimed not at sort of getting the bad guys, in this case, Hamas, which is what the Israeli government is officially seeking to do. It is the attempt to eliminate an entire people under the aegis of what is called collective guilt. And that activity is accompanied by a specific intention, which is also stated by Israeli government officials, to exterminate, to eliminate to ethnically cleanse Palestinians as a group from Gaza so that the Israelis can come in, settle it, and expand the land. I want to just very briefly enumerate the aspects that go into genocide that were so pronounced with the Nazis, and as we're witnessing, equally pronounced among the Israelis. And that is the brazen declaration of racial superiority, whether it's Aryan superiority or Jewish superiority, Jewish supremacy, as it's referred to, white supremacy. The predicate of genocide, the predicate of Nazism, the predicate of what's going on in Gaza is a racial notion of chosenness, of supremacy. And virtually everything else follows. The parallels continue when you think that one of the justifications for this among the Nazis was that the Germans needed what they called Lebensraum. They needed more space for an expanding population. If you've been watching the news, even this last week, the Israelis are at the gates of Damascus. They've taken over the southern portions of Lebanon. They have moved into the West Bank, and it's expected that they're going to shortly just announce that they've annexed the whole thing. And of course, they're now in the process of ethnically cleansing Gaza so they can make room for what they call Eretz Israel, Greater Israel. And if you look at some of the maps, there's portions of Jordan. They want to go on the other side, the eastern bank of Jordan, which is now a border. And there's indications they may even wanting to go back into the Sinai. And if you've been following the reports, there's concerns in Cyprus that there's so many Israelis coming in that they may have intentions on at least a portion of Cyprus. The methodology that is used is to sow chaos and war. You saw that as the Germans invaded one country after another. You've seen it over the last 30 years, as I've spoken numerous times before, so I'll just indicate it. The Netanyahu plan and the Israeli Mossad CIA plan to destabilize 7 countries that they itemized: Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Lebanon, Somalia, Sudan, and finally Iran. So that the more chaos is sown, the more possibility for adapting and expanding and gaining ever more territory, that it is just locked in and never surrendered. And this is accompanied generally by 2 things. Number one, a very close interactivity between the corporations of the country and the government to effectuate the policy. You saw that in Germany with the major corporations participating in the genocide, competing for contracts to build the gas chambers and the cyanide gas, etc. And you see it today in the genocide in Gaza. And there was a recent report from the UN rapporteur on Palestine, Francesca Albanese, listing over 50 companies in Israel and Europe and the United States that are actively colluding with the Israeli government to transact the genocide. Major corporations like Microsoft are listed. Major defense corporations, major intelligence corporations, all involved. And the second thing is that it's always accompanied by a rhetoric of scathing diminution of the humanity on the other side. So you have a perfect storm. You have racial superiority, the need for land, a collusion between the corporate, military, and governmental sectors, a rhetoric of dehumanization. And then the logic culminates inevitably in genocide. What I want to turn our attention to today is the reality that it is the United States that is the chief ally and supporter of the genocide. Every American president, bar none, have actively supported Israel's expansionism and the Zionist policies of ethnic cleansing. What is happening today under Trump and before him under Biden is that the genocide has become so explicit that the entire world now is bearing witness to live genocide 24/7. There's daily counts of the dead. There's pictures of the hospitals being blown up. And now most of the world, and in fact, most of even the American public, according to latest polls, understand that what's going on is genocide, but that has not lessened. In fact, has intensified the support of the United States for the genocide that's being transacted in Gaza and the West Bank. And a collusion between Mossad and the CIA and related organizations, MI6 in the UK, to effectuate not only the genocide, but the repression of civil liberties in Britain, in Europe, in the United States, to even be able to talk about it. So the poison of Nazism did not disappear when Hitler blew his brains out on April 15th, 1945, in a bunker in Berlin as the Russian troops were closing in on him. The toxicity lived and was embraced. So to understand what's going on today, we need to understand the history. And that's why I've invited Danny Sheehan to join us today, because he's the one person I know that probably knows more about this storyline of the arrival of the Nazi toxicity into the United States, and how before the Second World War, it was cultivated by interests in the United States. And so that there's this thread between the United States and the rise and effectuation of the Nazi movement in the 30s that exists to the present day. And like Israel, like every country that imbibes of that poison, it toxifies the psyche and produces the world in which we find ourselves. And it's very important for us to understand this so that we can take the kinds of actions required to at least bear witness, if not remedy, a situation that is producing what we observe on TV every day. So Danny Sheehan, you all know him. He's been on Humanity Rising numerous times. And so he needs no introduction. He's a very good friend. He's a constitutional litigator. He's the president of the New Paradigm Institute. He's working on many fronts, including the UAP disclosure front. But today we want to focus on what Danny has uncovered over many decades now of this interrelationship between the Nazis and the United States. So, Danny, I'll turn it over to you. You tell the story, and then when you're done, we'll circle back and have a discussion.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim. Well, it's an extraordinarily serious topic that we're dealing with here today. Not that we haven't dealt with other serious topics, but this is a profoundly important issue here. That I've my own personal opinion is that Netanyahu and the extraordinary fascist authoritarian kind of strain in the Israeli psyche is an extraordinarily unfortunate aspect of what's happening in Israel. And as we know, a substantial percentage of people in Israel itself and around the world in the Jewish community are horrified by what he is doing. But what I want to point out here is that, as Jim has stated 3 times now, I know that this poison of Nazism has somehow come into the United States at the end of World War II and kind of infected or toxified our body politic. My point here that I'd like to make in the time that I have to share is that it's worse than that. It's worse than that. Jim has just touched in a transfer over to me on the other point is that he said that this phenomenon was sort of incubated by a certain element here in the United States. Let me tell you what is really going on here. While it's true that the actual formal discussion of fascism in and of itself is some distinct from Nazism, which was a particular form of fascism. Treatise identifying fascism was what we're talking about, which brings with it this attendant issue of genocide and racism and the other qualities that Jim has pointed out. That this formal theory of fascism was actually articulated in an essay that was prepared in 1927 in Italy. It's attributed to Benito Mussolini, but the real progenitor of this was Giovanni Gentili, who was just an Italian philosopher. In 1927, the two of them joined together and wrote a major essay called The Fundamental Ideas of Political and Social Doctrine, in which it enunciated the theory of fascism. It wasn't published until 1932 with the rise of Mussolini and the fascists in Italy. But the fundamental premise of fascism, and this is why you need to understand this because it's so dangerous, it is the theory that the best economic, social, and political policy for a nation state to pursue is the doctrine of fascism. And that is to put at the disposal, to put all of the instrumentalities of the state, the power of the military, the power of the economic policy making, the policy of communicating cultural values through the country, to put all of these instrumentalities of the state at the disposal of the interests of corporations, of private corporations, to have the corporation designated as an entity in its own right, and that the corporation remains owned by the private owners of the shares of stock of the corporation, but that the corporation. Let me try to get rid of this phone here. Yeah. the bottom line is that the corporation stock remains in the possession of private shareholders, individual people, private owners of the corporation, but that the government, the instrumentalities of the state are put at the disposal of the interests of the corporation. In that way, what's good for General Motors is good for the country. So if in fact the state deploys its military to go into foreign nations to secure or maintain a continued privileged access to certain strategic raw materials that are available in the other nations, it's being done to secure those resources for the corporations, because the raw materials are available for the corporation. They can put the industrial tools that they have in their ownership into operation and transform those resources into products. They can hire more people, they pay more taxes, they give more jobs to people. It's a very specific concept of corporatism, of having the state run for the purposes of facilitating the activities of the corporations. And then they in turn trickle down the value to the citizenry. Okay, this idea started here in the United States. And the fact is that there was we all know about the robber barons. We've all heard the stories, even in high school civics courses, when they were still taught, that back at the end of the American Civil War in 1868, between 1868 and 1898, a 30-year period in the United States history, there arose in the country an entire subculture of the robber barons, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Harrimans. There's a series of like 24 families that rose up, and through the creation of the concept of the private stockholder-owned corporation, which originated in 1872 after the end of the American Civil War. In 1872, a series of court decisions decided that what they were going to do is they were going to acknowledge that a corporation was in fact a person, was an individual entity, and that private shareholders could gather together, join into a business partnership, and become a corporation. And all of those owners of the shares in the corporation were completely immunized against any personal liability for anything that the corporation did, and that just the corporate assets were liable for any wrongdoing that the corporation engaged in, and any injuries that it inflicted in the course of its business. And that whole model ended up becoming the means by which a certain number of major families in the United States were able to purchase the shares of corporations and acquire monopoly control over entire sectors of the economy, over the rail lines, over the shipping lines, over the production of steel, the production of electricity, in agricultural realms. That's where the robber barons came from. And what they did is they joined together these approximately 15 to 18 of these major families joined together to form a private cartel, basically, in Brown Brothers, and became Brown Brothers Harriman. It was a private investment group of these robber baron families on Wall Street in New York City. And what they did is at the end of World War One, okay, which came to an end in 1917. The United States entered into it late and became a member of the Allies in World War One. When World War One ended, there was the Versailles Treaty was entered into, and that was all supervised by the Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson. His name was Robert Lansing. And Robert Lansing was a member of a very wealthy family. the patron, the patriarch of which was John W. Foster. John W. Foster was the Secretary of State back in 1893 under Benjamin Harrison. He is the one who formulated the doctrine of imperialism. That he was the Secretary of State that laid claim to the Hawaiian Islands, to Guam, to the Asian islands, and that it was the progenitor of 1898, the whole idea of taking over Cuba, and this entire doctrine of imperialism, which even in high school civics, when it was still taught, it was acknowledged as the age of imperialism, and that the United States was engaged in active imperialism. They had earlier taken over all of the sections of Mexico. They'd spread out and were asserting imperial power all through South America. They'd overtaken Panama. They had built the Panama Canal for business so that it could facilitate shipping from the Atlantic to the Pacific. All of this age of imperialism on the part of the United States is another very clear period. The rise of the robber barons, the age of imperialism co-joined, so that by 1898, with the rise of power in the United States, you got the regime of McKinley. And so this is, but by 1893, just 5 years earlier, it was John W. Foster was the Secretary of State who kind of promulgated and solidified this theory of imperialism. His son-in-law, who married John W. Foster's oldest daughter, was Robert Lansing, who became the Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson. John W. Foster's two grandsons were John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. They were both attorneys in the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell. And Sullivan and Cromwell was the law firm that basically facilitated the overthrow of the Panamanian government and to build the Panama Canal. It was a law firm like no other law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell. It was a law unto itself, and it became the seat of power of this Brown Brothers Harriman coalition of these robber baron families. And what Robert Lansing did at the end of World War I, he oversaw the Versailles Treaty process. He brought his two nephews, John W. Foster and Allen Dulles, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, brought his two nephews, grandsons of his father-in-law, John W. Foster, to the Versailles Treaty negotiations in Versailles in France. They're the ones under the aegis of Robert Lansing who drafted into the Treaty of Versailles the reparations requirements that the German government that had lost World War I was to pay reparations for the damage that they had inflicted upon private business and business entities as a consequence of mounting an aggressive war, and that they had to pay these war reparations. Now, they didn't have the money to pay the war reparations because they were knocked flat. They'd lost the war. But what happened is Brown Brothers Harriman, which was the private investment group that these robber barons all had joined together to form, agreed to give loans to Germany. It turns out Allen Dulles, who was one of the two people, he and his brother John Foster Dulles, working under the authority of Robert Lansing, their uncle, the Secretary of State. Actually, Allen Dulles was legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman. And what they did is they drafted into the Versailles Treaty the requirements to pay the reparations. They knew Germany couldn't pay them. And so Brown Brothers Harriman, as a private investment group, loaned the money to the German government to pay the war reparations, and took as security for those loans controlling stock interests in the major war industry in Germany, the Krupp ball bearing factory, the IG explosives, etc. And they took controlling stock interests in those corporations of the war corporations. And then at Brown Brothers Harriman, the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman left in 1924, shortly thereafter, and set up a private bank, the Union Bank of New York, that was capitalized by the investors in Brown Brothers Harriman, these robber barons. They took a portion of their monies and they invested them to capitalize the Union Bank of New York. In the Union Bank of, and that CEO who left as the head of Brown Brothers Harriman in 1924 to set up the Union Bank of New York was George Walker, George Herbert Walker. That George Herbert Walker, that may sound familiar to you because he is the grandfather of George Herbert Walker Bush, George H.W. Bush, because the George Herbert Walker, who was the CEO of Brown Brothers Harriman, who set up the Union Bank of New York, when he left, he turned over control of the Brown Brothers Harriman to his son-in-law, that was Prescott Bush. Okay, and that Union Bank of New York then set up a subsidiary up in the Netherlands in Europe called the Bank of Shipping and Commerce, and they financed the construction of the international headquarters of the Third Reich in Germany, and began to finance the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany, to establish the doctrine of fascism in Germany, so that the corporations, which they owned a controlling interest in, would actually be the beneficiaries of major loans that were being given by the Bank of Shipping and Commerce out of the Union Bank of New York to rebuild the war machine of Germany, okay, so that they could become the bulwark against Bolshevism. That was their actual term. They were creating the Third Reich in Germany to become the bulwark against Bolshevism, because at the end of World War I, as you may recall, the Bolsheviks rose up against Tsar Nicholas and overthrew him and forced the Russian withdrawal as one of the allies from World War I, and established socialism. And they were challenging the theory of corporate control over the resources of the world in the age of imperialism. And they were opposing the imperialist activities of these private corporations. And they established a dialectical opposition to the activities of Brown Brothers Harriman, pressuring the United States government to engage in various imperial ventures of attempting to secure and to maintain a privileged access to the strategic raw materials that were in other nation states around the world. This is an extraordinarily important piece of history that people are not aware of. In short, the creation of Adolf Hitler and the funding of the rise to power of the Nazi government in Germany, the fascist government in Germany, was organized, stimulated, promulgated, and financed by the investors in Brown Brothers Harriman in the United States, who had this doctrine of racial superiority. You track back to these people, they were all white, male businessmen, major patriarchs, who were fostering and promoting anti-Black racism, anti-Jewish racism, in fact, at that time. And that entire strain of racial superiority was carried into this theory that the people who owned the overwhelming majority of the shares of stock in the major monopolized corporations in the United States were white Caucasians who harbored this kind of sense of racial superiority, the inferiority of the Black race and brown people, the Native American people, etc. And they're the ones that engaged in the quest after the end of the American Civil War, in the rise of the robber barons, to attempt to crush and dispel the Native American people from North America. This is a very specific group of people, this elite, racial, superior, Caucasian corporate stock owners This is the 1% that you keep hearing about, that are being talked about now, that these people that were the investors and owners of Brown Brothers Harriman are the paradigmatic 1% of the people. And these are the people that created the Union Bank of New York for the specific purpose of funding the rise of fascism in Germany, to be the antipode, the opponent of world socialism that was being generated out of Russia in the new Soviet Union with the fall of Tsar Nicholas in 1917 in October. So this is the kind of transcendent history of what was going on at the time. And so that the reality is that the culture and economy and political were not in fact poisoned by Nazism at the end of World War II, simply because of the importing into the United States through Operation Paperclip. The scientists, the Nazi scientists, rocket scientists, to support and promulgate our rocket industry, or even Operation Overcast, which was the doctrine pursuant to which the United States government recruited the ideological leaders of Nazi Germany and gathered them together and helped them escape from Europe at the end of World War II through the so-called rat line. This was done by the United States. The leadership at the OSS and its successor, which was the American Central Intelligence Agency, Otto Skorzeny, coordinated the fleeing from Germany into South America, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay. People know this. It's a piece of history, but people don't understand the relevance of it, that this is what was going on. And Reinhard Gehlen, who was the major general who was in charge in the Third Reich of the anti-Soviet and anti-Eastern Bloc intelligence all through World War II, okay, was handpicked and selected to become by the United States OSS and this political leadership in the United States under the aegis of the pressure of the people, the stock share owners in Brown Brothers Harriman, to have him become the head of the new West German government's intelligence agency. Okay. And Brown Brothers Harriman are the ones that proposed the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency. Robert Lovett, who was one of the senior partners in Brown Brothers Harriman, is the one who wrote the memo to President Truman, recommending that the OSS that had been created for wartime during World War II be basically extended into creating a Central Intelligence Agency that would have the authority under the covert operations to basically overthrow any governments in the world that were not supportive of the capitalist model of corporatism driving their economies, and anybody who was supportive of potential socialist economic policies. And this became the Truman Doctrine in 1948, right when they created the Central Intelligence Agency. And the Truman Doctrine stated explicitly that to fall into the hands of socialists anywhere in the world, even if it is the will of the majority of their own people. That is the Truman Doctrine. Okay. And this element was very active at that point in time in promulgating this kind of theory of government. And they, in fact, opposed the election for mayor's positions and things all through Europe of any of the partisans who had fought against the Nazis all through Europe, and secretly financed the election of former Nazis who got their names changed, got completely false identities and new identities, and ended up rising into positions of power in some of the major corporations in Germany that were owned, the majority shares of which were owned by Brown Brothers Harriman. So you need to understand that what I'm saying here, This is something that is not recognized in the United States. And so that when you see the rise of an authoritarian fascist like Donald Trump, who is a paradigmatic member of this upper 1%, a multimillionaire that owns Mar-a-Lago and has all of these multimillionaire 1%ers all around him, Elon Musk and all of the corporate moguls that are all around him. This is a continuation of an ideology, an economic and political ideology that was formulated at Brown Brothers Harriman back at the end of World War I. And it was carried into effect and actually generated World War II with Germany rising into power and under the auspices of trying to be the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe, attempted to basically take over all of Europe through this whole concept of Liebestraum, of the need to expand their physical territory and to establish the dominion of their Caucasian Nordic race, theoretically, over all of the racially inferior people. At the same time, that the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefellers were a major participant in Brown Brothers Harriman. They were promulgating the whole idea of white racial superiority and were engaged in spending millions of dollars of foundation money in genetics, attempting to establish the superiority of the Caucasian race, basically. Okay, and what I'm saying to you is that this communist conspiracy, this is history. This is actual American history of what it is that's happened here. So if we're going to be able to effectively deal with this phenomenon, this is not, and I need to point out something. At the end of World War II, when Reinhard Gehlen, the head of the anti-communist and anti-Eastern Bloc intelligence for the Third Reich, was handpicked by the leaders of the United States government to be the new head of West German intelligence, he became the sole primary source of intelligence information against the Soviet Union. And he was an ardent fascist and a Nazi, literally, Nazi party member. And he set up a school in Bavaria called the Anti-Communist Special Warfare Training Academy. And every one of the Western powers that were part of the Axis, including Israel now, the newly created Israel in 1948, they began to send their intelligence officers to the Anti-Communist Special Warfare Training Academy that was set up by Reinhard Gehlen. And this was predicated upon the old doctrine of the Ordensbergen, which was the order of the castles under the Nazi government, that they had this order of these three castles where they sent their young men to be trained to become SS officers and trained them in the ideology of racial superiority, the inferiority not only of the Jewish people, but of all non-Caucasian people. That was the Ordensbergen training in Germany. In fact, the Anti-Communist Special Warfare Training Academy established by Gehlen was actually based in one of the castles that was part of the Ordensbergen under the Nazi government. And these 1,200 men, including people from Mossad, from the new Israeli government, were sent to that school. And people from our Central Intelligence Agency, people like Theodore G. Shackley, who was in the original class of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1948, was sent to the Anti-Communist Special Warfare Training Academy under Gehlen. And so was Michael Harare, the guy that was appointed to be the head of the Wrath of God of the Mossad, that were assigned to track down and murder and assassinate the Black September people, who in fact killed the Israeli Olympiads in 1972. This is a very specific history that people are not told about. You're not taught. I graduated in foreign policy from Harvard College, and I wasn't told this there. They don't talk about this. The reason I ended up finding out about all this is I became general counsel to the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., in their social ministry office, where both Jim Garrison and I served in the capacity of anti-nuclear weapons policy, public policy for the social ministry office, working on behalf of all 54 of the major religious denominations in the country, in addition to the Jesuits, including the Union of American Hebrew Congregations under Rabbi David Saperstein. We're talking to you as your dearest friends of our generation, trying to explain to you what it is that we found out when we became so disenchanted with the lies that we were being told on behalf of the United States, the propaganda trying to justify our invasion of Vietnam, in the murdering of millions, literally millions of people in Southeast Asia, in attempting to establish a land base in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam. I mean, we're trying to share this information with you, so that we will know that we have to undertake much more profound and fundamental changes here in our country if we're going to recover. Number one, if we're going to be able to effectively combat what is going on now with Donald Trump and these fascists that are all around him. It's not that there aren't some good people who are trying to participate in the Trump administration, but you know perfectly well what's going on with Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon and these other people. These people are out and out ardent fascists. Okay. And they believe in this doctrine. And now Donald Trump is talking about having the United States government own portions of shares of the major private companies, but to leave those private major corporations in the ownership and hands of private corporate stockholders, but have the United States government be partners with them by purchasing shares of the stock in the companies, so that the United States government can get part of its funding through investment in these corporations and ownership of these corporations. This is just flagrant fascism, right out of the treatise, the 1932 published treatise of Benito Mussolini, in this guy Giovanni Gentile. I mean, this is information that needs to be shared with the American public, not to demonize our people, not to demonize all of our government, not to demonize all of the Israeli government, and certainly not the extraordinarily, at least previously heroic efforts on the part of the people of Israel to survive following the horrible Holocaust that was waged against them by the German fascist government. But this now, the people who are in charge in Israel, and the people who are now temporarily, pray to God, temporarily in charge here in our country, are ardent fascists. And we need to know that, because in Germany, the people didn't recognize it soon enough. And that you hear all of the stories. If we had only known, if we'd only been aware of where that was going to lead, we never would have supported it. We never would have, been drawn into let's make Germany great again after World War I. Let's rise from the ashes and make Germany great again. This is exactly what Trump is doing. Trump is making up stories about what a terrible, degenerate condition our entire country is in. Chaos was reigning in the major cities that are run by Democrats. And that he's got to send in military troops like the brown shirts now. ICE is like the brown shirts that were functioning under Hitler, and he's got things like Blackwater, these private military corporations now. that are hired by corporations. They have entire brigades of former trained U.S. military personnel now in these private military corporations working, hired by corporations to go into countries and crush, any opposition to the corporation moving in and taking their oil, taking their minerals, taking their rare minerals, other things that I've sat and talked to people in high-ranking people in the United States military who feel completely entitled to go into foreign countries and take their resources, asserting that if they didn't take those resources, well, then China would or Russia would. That we're on the brink right now of crossing over into a period where fascism is being accepted as a legitimate organizing principle for our government. And it, as Jim has pointed out, it comes with a series of other aspects. The political and economic theory of fascism brings with it an ever-growing authoritarianism and racial superiority. That's why you see this thing with Trump, talking about people. They all come from shithole countries, and that they're all degenerate and they're all lazy and they're shiftless, and all the Mexicans coming into the country are, rapists and demonizing them, just like Hitler did to the Jewish people and to the gypsies. This is happening right now, okay? And the condoning of what's happening in Gaza, and people can blame it on Netanyahu for sure, but it's the United States government, both Republican and Democratic administrations, that are providing all of the military equipment and all of the financing that is going behind this thing. That's exactly what's going on there. And so that we need to support the people in Israel who are opposing Netanyahu, who are, and the problem is they're being overwhelmed. That part of the people that at one time constituted a majority of people that didn't support Netanyahu are now, because of the war fever in the propaganda that's gone on, repeating over and over and over again the legitimate concern they had about the Hamas, coming in and killing, the 1,200 people, and doing all those horrible things that they did. But that doesn't justify the destruction of, like 50,000, non-combatant civilians, and a huge percentage of them being children, and blowing up private buildings everywhere. I mean, this is if I won't say if you don't recognize it now, you can know what's coming down the road. The thing is, you need to recognize it now to keep it from coming down the road at us. Okay, we've got to do everything that we can possibly do to mobilize, to unseat this government that's in power here in the United States right now, this extreme right-wing element inside the National Republican Party. We've got to oust them in the 2026 election so they don't control the House and the Senate, and just continue to rubber stamp the authoritarian, fascist economic and political policies of Trump. So it isn't just Netanyahu and the Zionists in Europe and that are engaged in the Middle East right now. But this is a poison that didn't come into the United States at the end of World War II from Nazi Germany. It is a economic and political theory that originated here in the United States. It was articulated in 1932 by Mussolini, and it is presently operative just below the surface. There's this great belief that somehow by supporting the major privately owned corporations and putting our instrumentalities of our government at the disposal of the interests of these corporations, that somehow this is the best economic model for our human family. So that Jim has asked me to come here today to just lay out this history for you, You can actually read about this if you would do the research. There's a book called The Nazi Hydra in America that you can read. I can't remember who the author is right now of that, but you can read these things are available for you. So that's information that I think is essential for people to know. This is extraordinarily controversial to raise these issues, and one has to be very careful to not fall prey to being accused of being just anti-Semitic. That I am certainly not anti-Semitic, and nor is Jim or anybody else here. But this activity on the part of Netanyahu and his right-wing, authoritarian minority government that he's got in power there, and Donald Trump here, are what they are, and we need to recognize it as such and do everything within our constitutional power to unseat these governments and reverse these policies and heal these wounds that are being inflicted upon our world at the present time.
Thank you, Danny. This has been very insightful and extraordinarily challenging, I think, to many of our mythologies about what the United States is and what it represents into the world. So I really want to appreciate your deep knowledge of history and your courage to speak these truths out in the very comprehensive way that you have. I'd like to just deepen for a moment, given the fact that you're a constitutional litigator and you probably know the U.S. Constitution better than anyone, at least that I know. I'd love to have you just comment on the erosion that's happening to the U.S. constitutional
Oh,
fabric with this assault. Because when we think of fascism, it's certainly along the lines of supporting genocide in Israel and fomenting war and chaos abroad. But what's happening in the United States is also a very concerted, broad range attack on the constitutional
that's right.
structures that have undergirded American democracy for just short of 250 years. So, talk about the assault on our democratic institutions and constitutional checks and balances, because I think that's very important part of fascism and what we need
Absolutely.
to be dealing with.
Absolutely. The fascist government, the authoritarian strain in fascism, in is it holds in contempt the concept of democracy, the idea that the great unwashed in any given nation state would actually participate in some way on an equal footing with elite, wealthy stockholder members of the 1%, that somehow they should throw over into the hands of the great unwashed masses the decision-making authority over their own country. That there's no doubt that Donald Trump holds the Constitution of the United States in utter contempt. And he has people in positions of power that he's appointed to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals now, that have stated when they were inside the Justice Department to just basically tell the judges to piss off. If they declare something that Donald Trump wants to do is unconstitutional, just tell the judges to piss off and just keep on going forward and assert your power. It's like everything that Donald Trump is doing is in a bilateral dynamic of negotiation. I'll do whatever I want to do, and if you want to try to stop me, go ahead. But I'm going to just keep on doing it. And what he's doing is he's citing Article 2 of the Constitution that created the presidency, which was put in place to carry into effect the decisions of Congress. The House and Senate and there's a United States Supreme Court case called Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer. It's the United States Supreme Court decision where Harry Truman tried to take over the steel mills in the Korean War because there was a steel strike going on. And he just asserted the power to try to take it over, saying, "Oh, well, we're at war and in Korea, and we can't have a diminution of the amount of steel we have." So he commandeered the steel corporations, sent in the military to run the steel companies, and the United States Supreme Court ruled, saying, "Look, let's be really clear about something in the Constitution. Article 1 of the Constitution creates the Congress of the United States representatives of the people of the country, and they are the ones that make policy. These are the ones who have the power to decide whether to go to war or not, whether to commit military troops to what appropriations are going to be provided for the government. The executive branch under the presidency is there to enforce the decisions that are made by Congress, to carry them into effect, to execute the laws, not to make up the laws, and not to just do whatever Trump has actually stated that once he's elected, he has a right to do anything he wants to do.
Mhm.
And that he can order anybody and everybody in any executive office to do exactly what he wants, that he can call up the attorney general and tell the attorney general to prosecute any person that he wants prosecuted, or he can stop them from prosecuting any person he wants, exonerated. People keep referring to it as being a king, and that's not coincidental. Because it was exactly those kind of authoritarian assertions of power on the part of the royalty in Europe that has caused the revolution in the United States against them. Is the whole purpose of establishing the Constitution, and that all the principal writers, James Madison, Aaron Burr, the other people that were involved in drafting the Constitution, were trained by John Witherspoon in the theological underpinnings of natural law, and that permeate our Constitution, that fundamental rights belong to our people. They don't reside in the government. There's no inherent power in the government. The government is a government of strictly delegated authority that has been delegated to the instrumentalities of our federal government by our people, and we retain the sovereignty. Okay, and the sovereignty certainly doesn't devolve to one person in the executive branch. And so that this theory of the unitary executive, where the president can just call up anybody and tell them whatever to do, that's a brainchild of Dick Cheney, back when he was the Secretary of Defense under Bush Sr. And the vice president under W. Bush. This authoritarian model of the American government.
Mhm.
And Trump has seized upon that. I mean, it's important to remember that I know the investigators that were hired by the first wife of Donald Trump in their divorce. And they were told in detail by her that he slept with a copy of Mein Kampf on his bedstand. Okay. And he read speeches of Adolf Hitler. This is extraordinarily important thing to know. That Donald Trump doesn't just respect authoritarian leaders; he wants all authoritarian leaders to run the nation states. That's why he praises them. That he is not only a fascist who believes in the wedding of the interests of the corporations with the instrumentalities of the state, but he's an authoritarian, which is sort of an intrinsic aspect of the fascist ideology. Okay, it's racist, it's genocidal, it's anti-civil rights, it's anti-democratic. It's like we're being given a test here. We're being given a test before we come into direct, immediate contact with an extraterrestrial civilization that's all around us. We're being tested to see whether, when it's put right in our face, right in front of us, whether we have taken seriously everything we've ever been taught. Everything we've ever been taught about common decency, everything we've ever been taught about constitutional principles, everything we've ever been taught about the value of democracy and equality. This is a test, okay? And that we have to pass this test. It's painful. There are victims that are taken in this test, but we have got to rise to the occasion, and we've got to unseat these governments. We've got to unseat this minority group of people who've tried to take control of it. And we need to understand that this element has been with us, throughout the history of the United States and throughout the history of Israel, that this element, a minority element, has always been there. So it isn't as though we don't know what they want, but here they are. They've come forward now saying, look at everything you said about us is true. And so, piss on you, who cares? We're going to show you that we're going to do this. And so we have got to be able to gird our loins, join together, and establish unity among all of us to oppose these minority people that have taken control of these governments. Okay, and rise up as a majority, assert our constitutional rights in every single way possible. Okay, but understand that they have to be removed from power. They have to be removed from power.
Yeah. One last question, Danny, because I think it both exemplifies the malignancy of what's been happening, but also the tremors of what could potentially destroy Trump, and that's the Epstein scandal. There's a lot of
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm just saying it's the betrayal. It's the betrayal of his promise to reveal the deeply hidden secrets of the deep state that he's
speak to that.
It's the Epstein secrecy, and it's the UFO stuff. Everybody wants to know about UFOs. I mean, you take the average fifth grader and ask them to draw a UFO, and they'll draw it for you, and they'll draw what an ET person looks like. And here's the United States governing powers asserting nothing to see here. There's no such thing. We don't know what you're talking about. There's just a flock of birds, that you misidentified. I mean, it's preposterous. It's preposterous. Okay. And this thing with Epstein, what we're in the process of doing, we're when Congress comes back, next week, basically, comes back to Washington, we're going to hold major hearings on September 9th of the committee. There's a task force on transparency in the government oversight, the government oversight committee in the House of Representatives. We're holding hearings on transparency to expose these deeply concealed secrets. And this thing that we've shared with you this morning is one of the secrets. The secrets that this element inside our United States culture was responsible for the rise of Hitler, the financing and training of Hitler. Okay, and that we need to know that, and that they're now manifesting in our country and in Israel and in other parts of the world, and so that this thing with Epstein is an Achilles heel of Trump, because the people are deeply offended that he so clearly promised to turn over all of this information. And he now realizes that he may have gotten away with some of the sexual philandering that he's engaged in the past, even though he's been convicted, of these criminal offenses with that regard to that. But the bottom line is that he's now afraid that because of the information about him that is in the Epstein files, that he's going to abuse all of his power as president to do everything he can do to suppress that information coming out, even though he rose to office in part promising to reveal it all, promising to reveal the UFO stuff, promising to reveal the Epstein stuff. And now once he gets in power, saying, okay, on second thought, I don't think so, and so that when Congress comes back, I'm hoping that they're going to resubmit their there's a discharge petition that has been put on the floor of the House of Representatives to compel the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, to issue a law mandating that every single document pertaining to the Epstein issue be made public. okay, as Trump promised he would, and as the members of the Republican Party promised it would be done. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing for the UFO thing. And we're going to insist that the additional documents that have not been released about the Kennedy assassination also be released.
Mhm.
Okay. And that the other information that there, not only that the documents that still exist be released, but that there be depositions undertaken to ascertain what it is that happened in the Kennedy assassination. The vast overwhelming majority of people in the country know that the president was killed, by a conspiracy. They know that, okay? And that the legitimacy of the government itself is at stake here.
Mhm.
And that we as loyal citizens have to rise up and assert our constitutional rights, and to demand that the members of the elected representatives of Congress fulfill their constitutional obligation to hold this government responsible, this executive branch responsible for what's happened here. Okay. And that we're going to vote them out of office and replace them if they don't do it. That's what we have to do. People have got to get up off the couch, stop, with the clicker turning from one movie from another, one football game, one basketball game, one baseball game after another, and realize that you've got to get up and become active citizens. This is a state of emergency. This is the situation that obtained in the 1930s in Germany when people kept saying, if we had only known, if we had only known. The things that we have seen happening now right in front of us already tell you that it's already upon us. And we have to move now. We have to mobilize and get everybody up off the couch and get busy, and join Citizens for Disclosure. We have a major movement. The New Paradigm Institute is Citizens for Disclosure. And it's not for just disclosure of the UFO issue. It's for disclosure of the Epstein stuff. It's the disclosure of the Kennedy assassination stuff.
Fantastic.
It's the exposure of the stuff with regard to 9/11 that everybody knows is being concealed. Okay. This is the Citizens for Disclosure. Just contact us at the newparadigminstitute.org and become members. It's totally free. We'll provide all this information for you. Okay. Just let's save the country. Let's save democracy. Let's save our humanity here at the edge of the age of disclosure.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you for everything that you're doing. I recommend Citizens for Disclosure at newparadigminstitute.org. I look forward to seeing you next week, Danny, at the congressional hearing on the 9th. And I just in closing, everyone, what we've heard today is like looking at the sun directly with your eyes. It's hard to take in the enormity of what our country and our government has done over the last century, but not unless and until we take seriously what Danny has just laid out, will we understand the gravity of our situation and therefore mobilize the energy required within us to take the actions, particularly with regards to the upcoming election, to ensure a complete turnover of the House of Representatives and the Senate toward a progressive value. So, Danny, thank you. Look forward to having you on again down the trail.
Absolutely.
And if you want to join the after chat, everyone, the link is in the chat box. And then I'll see you again next Friday for our next session of Humanity Rising. Thanks, Danny. See you soon.
Terrific. Thanks, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.